So smartphones are getting better and better, and one of the things that continues to blow my mind is the stabilization functionality of modern smartphones. Seriously, the stabilization on my iPhone 14 Pro is significantly better than my far more expensive video cameras, where literally the sole purpose is to shoot professional standard video. Obviously, you're supposed to be able to pick up a smartphone and just shoot with them fast and easy, but it is still pretty crazy. So I'm not gonna lie to you guys, when DJI reached out and asked me if they could send me their DJI Osmo Mobile 6, I was kind of on the fence about covering it because, like I said, smartphone stabilization now is so good. But I also know that smartphone gimbals are obviously really popular, and that must be for a reason. So by the end of this video, I want you guys to have an answer to that question. Do you actually need a smartphone gimbal? I'm going to be comparing side-by-side footage to footage shot on the iPhone 14 Pro with and without the gimbal, and also in action mode. A quick note is that the comparisons were filmed using the iPhone 14 Pro because that's kind of my daily smartphone, but the Osmo Mobile 6 is compatible with an absolute ton of devices, including most Android devices as well. Before we get into the comparison footage, can we just appreciate how tiny this gimbal is? So that's my iPhone 14 Pro, and that is the gimbal. This literally goes inside my pocket, which is actually mad for a gimbal. If you're doing a lot of traveling, this is a super efficiently sized gimbal, and that's just a massively underrated feature. So this is what comes with the gimbal. It's made up of these three parts. You've obviously got the gimbal itself, then you've got this little kind of tripod adapter that can go on and off, and that obviously lets you set the gimbal down and stand it up, and then you have this magnetic clamp, which is actually what goes around the phone. So the magnetic clamp is a killer feature. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just attaching it onto the back of the iPhone 14 Pro, like so. That just snaps on like that. Then I'm going to take the gimbal, I'm going to unlock it by removing this, kind of bringing this piece around to the side. Then it just folds right up like this. The gimbal automatically powers itself on, and then you just grab the clamp. My phone's upside down. You grab the iPhone in its clamp, and it snaps on just like that. The gimbal is automatically powered on, and it will automatically start working. One of my favorite features about the DJI Osmo Mobile 6 is that you can press this kind of swivel button at the bottom, and it go from shooting horizontal video to portrait video literally in a matter of seconds. No balancing required or anything like that. It's probably the easiest gimbal operation I've ever used. To give you a kind of best visual for what a gimbal is doing on a camera, particularly when it comes to smartphones, I think steps actually illustrate this best, because obviously this is a pretty hard thing for a camera to stabilize. So this is the standard iPhone 14 Pro shot, and then this is the gimbal footage, and you can see it's substantially cleaner, significantly less shake, as you can see. If we see this side by side, this is kind of even more obvious. I probably don't need to point out that the shot on the left is the gimbal footage and the shot on the right is the handheld. Sorry that the shots don't line up like kind of exactly point for point, but this does illustrate just how much stabilization is going on using the gimbal. Same thing here, another side by side, and for me in this one it's kind of just illustrative of this up and down motion that you very much get using handheld. So you can see that there is just a much more pronounced step every single time I take a step on the footage on the left, which is the handheld, versus the footage on the right, which is the gimbal. It's just significantly kind of more stable on the horizontal level almost at all times. Moving on to something a bit more active, I've got some skateboarding footage for you here. Starting off with standard handheld, no action mode, so this is just kind of standard 25 frames a second 4K video on the iPhone 14 Pro. So you can have a look how this looks. I think you can see some visible shake. There's a few little bits. Obviously, when you do larger movements on the camera, you do get a bit more kind of shake in frame, obviously. But I actually do think this is held up pretty well overall. The iPhone does do well with small steps, but large camera movements like that big move just there, you do get quite a bit more shake in frame. You can see how much the phone is moving and how much the footage is kind of sort of stabilized by the camera's AI. We obviously have to throw in action mode as well, these kind of more advanced stabilization features. For me, the biggest downside with action mode is actually that you reduce the resolution quite drastically. It goes down from 4K maximum resolution on my iPhone 14 Pro to 2.8K, and you also need to have quite a lot of light available in the shot, and the footage does actually just kind of look a little bit more grainy, a lot more noisy, so that is just a major downside. Also, there's a fairly aggressive crop on the footage as well, because obviously it's cropping into that image to allow for the stabilization. It does do a decent job of kind of smoothing out some of the larger movements, but I still can overwhelmingly tell that this is handheld, and you do get get still a kind of an up and down motion from each step I'm taking. Now we move on to the gimbal shot, and whilst the other handhelds were good, I think this for me is the absolute money shot. I think this basically is essentially perfect in terms of iPhone footage. Like, you can't really see any visible shake at all. Feels like the camera's totally sort of gliding behind Kyle skating here. Even when you're doing kind of larger steps or larger movements, the camera just remains pretty much steady the entire way through. All of the gimbal footage you've seen so far, I was in all follow mode, so the gimbal will follow kind of pretty much any movement or motion in terms of the axis. Obviously, you can also shoot in portrait, as you guys know. Here's a shot of me just following Kyle in portrait mode, and again in all follow mode. You can just see like kind of how smooth you actually get the footage. Like even shooting in portrait, the gimbal has no problem balancing. This just looks great in my opinion. Another mode is FPV mode, and it lets you get shots like this. In my opinion, probably actually the coolest mode on the gimbal. This is the mode which I found myself just kind of having the most fun with, to be honest. You can just immediately see the cool kind of variation in camera angles. It kind of will move which way you turn the gimbal, and it creates this kind of cool vortexy type effect. Here's the handheld shot of me sort of trying to get something similar. Again, I think the iPhone does do a decent job here, considering I'm running, and you know, it's doing a decent job stabilizing this footage, except it's just not to the same level of the gimbal footage. To give you guys an idea, I've zoomed in on both of the footage here, so that's the gimbal, and then this is the handheld equivalent. Hopefully this just kind of illustrates the kind of differences in the two shots. So another huge advantage of using a smartphone gimbal with more modern smartphone cameras is that as cameras continue to improve on these smartphone systems, we've been given telephoto lenses. And obviously, as you guys know, if you zoom in on a shot, you're going to see your camera shake, far more visibly. So you can see this in comparisons here. You can see that the footage taken without the gimbal in the 3x mode on the iPhone 14 Pro is very, very obviously shaky, because you're kind of zooming in and you're just going to be able to see those shakes far more pronounced. And there's significantly less shake in the gimbal footage. So I think after all that, you can clearly see the benefit of using a smartphone gimbal like the DJI Osmo Mobile 6. I actually think the kind of basic smartphone stabilization on the iPhone 14 Pro held up really well, but I think you can tell that the shots are taken just using a phone. Even though the stabilization is great, it does look like you're kind of just running along with your phone, like obviously you are. Action mode can help smooth this out just a little bit, but I do think the reduction in resolution on action mode is a little bit of a killer, because you kind of have no other option. Really, the main advantage is that it just massively frees up your ability to get creative shots using a smartphone gimbal. Filming these big, long camera moves, anything a bit larger, is going to immediately be leveled up by using the DJI Osmo Mobile 6 compared to just using handheld. The ability to kind of have the horizon almost locked in one place, you can immediately tell that there's significant difference in those types of two shots. They also have spin mode, which I didn't really love and didn't really use. It's basically a mode which you can kind of get like almost like a vortex shot, and that's just not something I would have ever used in the work that I do. However, using FPV, super fun. I can see that, have a look at like this shot here, just not possible at all using kind of standard handheld. If you tried to do this on a handheld, you just immediately see a load of shake. So you might be able to get the odd few seconds that look similar, but you're not getting the same level. Like, I actually think this mode on its own is enough to go and buy this mode for me. Super fun and amazing look to get out of a smartphone camera. For me, I think that's the key difference here. So you might get the odd kind of 5 seconds, 10 seconds of a great shot using a standard handheld on a smartphone, but using a gimbal like the Osmo Mobile 6 allows you to get perfect stable footage every time you try. So hopefully you've got a clearer idea as to whether you actually need a smartphone gimbal. And now I just want to briefly talk specifically about the Osmo Mobile 6 and why I think this makes such a good choice for mobile smartphone content creators. So first of all is the size and the portability. Like, as mentioned, it's just absolutely tiny. I've already talked about this, but the fact that it takes up such a tiny amount of space in my bag is just a massive win. Next is this sort of selfie stick design. So I'm going to unlock it here, and then you can see that you have this selfie stick mode, which actually allows you to, basically massively extend the size of the gimbal and the reach that you have. I personally wouldn't use this in my daily basis in terms of mobile content creation. I actually like to keep the form factor as small as possible, but I think the fact that you have that as a feature, it allows you to get angles that you just never would normally be able to get. And then finally, I think the ease of use on the Osmo Mobile 6 is just absolutely fantastic. Generally, when I've used smartphone gimbals in the past, they're a bit simplistic in their operation. Like, you can't really tell what mode you're in, that type of thing. The Osmo Mobile 6 has very, very quick access and very easy access to mode changing without having to go into an app. They do have a very good app. I actually didn't end up using this a ton, but they do have things like really good object tracking, active tracking inside the app if that's kind of more your style. I actually ended up shooting a lot in the kind of standard camera app, which is obviously great that you can do that as well, just gives you the flexibility. But obviously that paired with the fact that it has super quick startup operation, it's just an absolute breeze. And this basically kind of allows me to be as creative as possible without having to think about the kind of limitations of my gear. I think if you haven't tried a smartphone gimbal, I do think you should definitely give it a whirl, and the DJI Osmo Mobile 6 is a fantastic choice.